In the hush of night, when the flames of the village fire crackle low and the shadows of the forest stretch long, a voice begins to rise. It is the voice of the storyteller, weaving sound into memory, drawing laughter from children and knowing nods from elders. The tale they tell is not just of beasts and men, of gods and spirits, but of one who is all of these at once, small as a coin, clever as a fox, foolish as a child, enduring as time itself. His name is Anansi. Anansi is the spider whose web stretches across the world. He is the trickster who topples giants with a thread, the thief who stole stories from the sky god, the fool whose greed leaves him hungry, and the sly teacher who explains why the moon shines, why death walks, and why wisdom is never whole. He is at once comic and cosmic, his adventures echoing from the forests of West Africa to the islands of the Caribbean, from the plantations of the Americas to the corners of the modern world. To encounter Anansi is to encounter the art of storytelling itself. His laughter carried in the dark, a whisper of resistance against power, a mirror of human weakness, and a reminder that cleverness is as mighty as strength. His tales are threads spun in firelight, passed from tongue to tongue, binding communities across centuries. Some shimmer with joy, others with sorrow, but all glisten with the unmistakable silk of his cunning. This story is not about symbols or scholars' interpretations, but about the stories themselves. The living, breathing myths that have carried Anansi across generations. Here he will climb the sky, battle elephant and monkey, scatter wisdom across the earth, stretch his legs in hunger, and laugh at the very jaws of death. The tales will be retold in the richness of narrative, in the voice of the storyteller, as though you too were sitting in the glow of the fire, listening to the spider's endless tricks. Step into the web. The stories of Anansi await. Long before stories belonged to humankind, the earth was quiet. People tilled their fields, fetched water, and raised their children in silence, for no tale had yet been told to break the stillness of the night. The sun rose and set, the moon waxed and waned, but no laughter or wisdom was shared across the firelight. All the stories that might have entertained mortals or taught them the ways of the world were locked away in the high heavens, guarded by Nyame, the great sky god. High in the forests of the Ashanti lands lived a small creature whose cleverness was unmatched. He was Anansi, sometimes appearing as a man with spindly limbs, sometimes as a spider, spinning webs that glittered with dew. Though tiny compared to the mighty beasts that roamed the earth, Anansi's mind was sharp, restless, and filled with schemes. He watched the people of the earth labor through their long days without laughter, and he decided that this was not the way things should remain. He longed to bring stories down from the heavens, to weave them into the lives of men and women just as he wove silk between the trees. So Anansi spun a web that reached far above the clouds, a shining ladder of gossamer stretching toward the throne of the sky god. Climbing swiftly, he ascended until he reached the radiant court of Nyame. The sky god sat upon a throne of brilliance, surrounded by clouds and stars. Before him lay the golden box that contained all the world's stories. Nyame regarded the little spider with curiosity, for rarely did a creature so small approach his throne. When Anansi announced his desire to claim the stories for humankind, the god did not immediately refuse, but his laughter rumbled like thunder. To give away the treasure of stories could not be done lightly. The god named a price so impossible that none had ever dared attempt it. He demanded that Anansi capture 3 terrible creatures, Onini the python, long and deadly, Osebo the leopard, strong and fierce, and Mamoboro, the hornets who swarmed with fire in their stings. If the spider could present all three, the box of stories would be his. The task seemed hopeless, for many had fallen before such beasts. Yet Anansi, with his restless wit, returned to earth undaunted. At his side was Asu, his clever wife, who often whispered strategies that turned the tide in his favor. With her counsel, Anansi began to lay his plans. The first challenge was Onini, the python. The serpent lay stretched beside a river, its coils shimmering in the morning light. Rather than confront the beast with strength, Anansi devised a contest of measure. Carrying a long branch, he pretended to argue with Asu, claiming the snake was longer than the branch, while his wife insisted the opposite. His mutterings reached the ears of Onini, who lifted his head in irritation at the disturbance. When Anansi explained the dispute, the python's pride was stirred. It agreed to prove its length by lying beside the branch. Patiently, Anansi moved along its body, fastening silk around its scales under the pretense of helping it remain straight. Slowly, the python realized too late that it had been bound fast to the branch, wrapped so tightly it could not move. Victorious, Anansi lifted the bound serpent and carried it skyward, presenting it before Nyame. The god rumbled with amusement, impressed by the spider's cunning, and reminded him that two challenges still remained. The second trial lay in the forest, where Osebo, the leopard, prowled. Anansi knew he could never match the leopard's strength, so he turned instead to the earth itself. He dug a deep pit along the leopard's path and concealed it with branches and leaves. That night, Osebo, heavy with fatigue from hunting, strode across the path and fell into the hidden trap. In the morning, Anansi appeared above the pit, feigning surprise and concern. He offered to help the leopard escape and prepared a trap with a bent tree, cords of silk, and a dangling rope. Osebo, desperate for freedom, tied the rope around his tail, and Anansi released the bent tree. With a snap, the leopard was hoisted into the air, dangling helplessly as the spider secured him with more webbing. Once again, Anansi climbed to the heavens, presenting the bound leopard to the god, who now leaned forward with growing respect. Two were delivered, but the last would test Anansi's cunning even further. The final task was to capture Moboro, the hornets whose sting was fire. Approaching their nest, Anansi carried a gourd filled with water. He poured it upon himself and upon the nest, as though rain were falling heavily. He complained of the storm and offered the hornets shelter in his gourd. Believing him, they swarmed inside, grateful for the protection. At once, Anansi sealed the opening with a broad leaf and bound it with silk, trapping the deadly swarm. With python, leopard, and hornets secured, Anansi climbed again to Nyame's throne. The sky god regarded the little spider, astonished that he had achieved the impossible. With a voice like the rolling of thunder, Nyame declared that Anansi had paid the price. He handed over the box of stories and decreed that henceforth, whenever a tale was told, it must be acknowledged as Anansi's tale. Thus, through wit and patience, the spider brought stories down to earth. From that day, people gathered around their fires to share laughter, wisdom, and lessons woven through Anansi's adventures. The silence of the world was broken, replaced by the hum of storytelling. In this way, the spider became the keeper of tales, and every story retold carried a thread of his web. Having claimed the stories from Nyame, Anansi's reputation grew. His cleverness was whispered among the people, his name a spark of both admiration and warning. But Anansi's mind could not rest. He realized that while he held stories, true wisdom was scattered across the earth, locked in objects, animals, and even the clouds. He decided that the world itself would be a puzzle to unravel, and he would claim its secrets. Anansi's first thought was to gather all wisdom in one place. He climbed to the tallest tree, reaching toward the heavens once again. In his hands, he held a pot into which he intended to pour every fragment of wisdom he could find. The elders of the forest observed him with curiosity. Children laughed as the spider murmured to himself, thinking no one could see the folly that often accompanied genius. As Anansi collected wisdom, he realized that the more he accumulated, the heavier the pot became. His limbs strained under the weight. He paused to consider how best to carry it. He decided the easiest way was to tie it to his front and drag it upward along a tree branch. But try as he might, the pot kept slipping and rattling against the bark. It was then that his son, Nantikuma, approached quietly. "Father," the boy said, "perhaps wisdom is not meant to be kept in one place. Perhaps it is best shared, not hoarded." Anansi, proud and somewhat impatient, laughed. He was sure he understood the world better than any child. Still, he tried one last attempt, standing the pot on his back. But the weight was too great. In frustration, he kicked at the tree. The pot toppled, spilling wisdom across the earth. Each drop became a spark of understanding for those who would stumble upon it. Some found cleverness, some patience, some insight into human folly, and some a gentle sense of humor. Anansi's plan to monopolize wisdom had failed, but the world was better for it. People began to learn from each other, from stories, from experience, and from the spark of insight left by the spider's spilled treasure. Anansi, though frustrated, smiled to himself. In losing control, he had enriched the earth. Yet Anansi's adventures were far from over. One evening, he overheard animals quarreling over who was the strongest, the fastest, and the cleverest. The elephant boasted of might, the leopard of speed, and the monkey of agility. Anansi, ever the trickster, saw an opportunity. He approached each, feigning admiration for their strengths, while sowing seeds of doubt about the others. Soon a contest was arranged. Elephant would race, monkey would climb, leopard would hunt. But Anansi had prepared a series of riddles and obstacles that each animal could not overcome alone. By the end, all three were exhausted, humiliated, and slightly wiser for the experience. Anansi laughed not cruelly, but as one who knew the folly of pride and the joy of subtlety. Through these tales, Anansi demonstrated that intelligence and cunning often surpass brute strength. He taught that pride can be a trap, and that laughter is as essential to survival as food or shelter. People repeated these stories around fires, and slowly, the spider's influence seeped into every corner of human understanding. And so, Anansi became not just a collector of stories, but a teacher in disguise. In every tale, he left lessons wrapped in laughter, cleverness hidden beneath trickery, and truths scattered like seeds. Wherever Anansi roamed, he left a trail of insight, and every listener of his stories carried a thread of his web in their mind. Despite all the wisdom and stories he had gathered, Anansi's appetite, for food as well as for mischief, remained insatiable. One day, he heard of a feast being prepared by the animals of the forest. Each creature would bring a dish, and the table promised to overflow with delicacies. Anansi's mind began to spin like the threads of his web, devising a way to partake in every morsel without lifting a finger. He tied a fine thread from each of his 8 legs to the cooking pots of different animals. There were pots of roasted yams, bubbling stews, sweet honey, and roasted fruits. Each animal, unaware of the spider's cunning, continued preparing their meals. When the dishes were ready, every cook tugged their thread, signaling that the food awaited consumption. At once, Anansi was pulled in 8 directions. His legs stretched painfully thin, elongating like the delicate silk he spun. He flailed helplessly, twisted and contorted by the competing tugs of the hungry animals. Finally, exhausted and unable to reach any single dish properly, he tumbled into a river to free himself. Emerging with long, spindly legs, soaked and famished, Anansi had learned a lesson in moderation, albeit the hard way. Though he had failed to satisfy his hunger, his cleverness remained intact. Other stories tell of his attempts to trick larger animals in exchange for meals or favors. Once, he confronted the tiger, who was known for hunting with pride and consuming without gratitude. Anansi scolded the tiger for neglecting to give thanks before eating. Ashamed, the tiger bowed his head, and its next meal escaped, allowing Anansi to laugh silently at the trick. In another tale, Anansi and the tiger were traveling together, each carrying a knife. The spider suggested they prove their courage by discarding their blades. The tiger, eager to display bravery, threw his knife away. Anansi, however, only pretended to cast his weapon aside, hiding it carefully. Later, when a pineapple was found, Anansi used his knife to slice it, enjoying the sweet fruit while the tiger went hungry. These stories illustrated the spider's cunning, showing that wit could outmaneuver strength and preparation could defeat brute force. Yet even the cleverest of schemes sometimes failed. Anansi once tried to trap the tiger in a boiling pot, promising a magical meal. The tiger, trusting in the spider's words, climbed inside only to shatter the vessel with its strength. Anansi, singed and frightened, fled into the trees. Through these failures, the spider revealed another truth. Cleverness without caution could be dangerous, even for a master trickster. Through his feasts, his tugs of war with pots, and his contests with stronger creatures, Anansi became both a teacher and a comic figure. Children learned to laugh at his misadventures, while elders nodded at the lessons hidden beneath his tricks. Gluttony, pride, and impatience all became part of the moral fabric of his stories, woven seamlessly into the humor and cunning of his adventures. The Great Feast was more than just a tale of hunger and folly. It was a story of human nature, reflected in a tiny spider. Anansi reminded his listeners that cleverness could win battles, but moderation, humility, and foresight were essential to avoid disaster. His failures were as instructive as his victories, each twist in the thread offering a lesson to those who watched and listened. And so, the spider's web grew, not just in forests or villages, but in the hearts and minds of all who heard his stories. Each tug, each stretch, each trick, and each laugh became a thread binding generations together, ensuring that Anansi's mischief, wisdom, and folly would endure forever. Anansi's restless spirit never rested. Beyond stealing stories or hoarding wisdom, he sought to prove that cleverness could triumph over size, strength, and pride. His rivals were many, from the immense elephant to the nimble monkey, from crocodile in the rivers to owl in the sky. Each contest was another thread in the vast tapestry of his legend, binding his name to the fates of creatures far larger and stronger than himself. Elephant, colossal and confident, ruled the forest paths with unwavering authority. His tusks gleamed white, his tread shook the earth, and his every step demanded respect. Yet Anansi, small as a dewdrop on a leaf, decided to humble the mighty beast. He spun his finest silk, sticky and strong, tying one end to Elephant's leg and carrying the other deep into the forest, fastening it to a great rock hidden among trees. As Elephant strained, believing himself to resist, Anansi's cunning revealed the trick. The silk was also tied to Hippopotamus, lounging in a river. Each beast pulled, unaware of the other's involvement, until exhaustion overcame them both. When Anansi revealed the deception, laughter spread across the forest. Even the largest creatures learned that pride could be manipulated by wit, and that smallness did not preclude power. Monkey, quick and playful, was a rival closer to Anansi's own nature. In one contest, Anansi challenged him to gather the sweetest fruit from the highest tree. Monkey leapt effortlessly, while Anansi spun a web into the canopy to glide from branch to branch. Initially, it seemed that the spider might succeed, but greed betrayed him. His arms overflowed with fruit, the web sagging under the weight. Monkey, careful and selective, reached the ground first, prize in hand. The tale reminded listeners that balance, patience, and discernment often outweighed sheer cunning. At other times, Anansi's cleverness turned Monkey into the fool. He boasted that his silk could lift the heaviest burden and convinced Monkey to tie a thread around his waist, fastening the other end to a bent tree. When released, the tree sprang upright, hurling Monkey into the air, flailing helplessly while Anansi laughed. Even the nimblest could be undone by a spider's ingenuity. Crocodile, lurking in rivers with jaws wide and merciless, became another target, declaring that no creature could cross his waters safely. He was certain of his dominion. Anansi, however, stretched a silk thread from one bank to the other, tiptoeing lightly above the current. Crocodile lunged, but the spider leapt to a tree branch, mocking brute strength with agile wit. Ever after, crocodiles regarded webs overhead with suspicion, a reminder that cunning could outmaneuver raw power. Even the birds of the sky were not exempt. Envious of their freedom, Anansi sought to fly, begging Owl for feathers. For a fleeting moment, he soared above the treetops, exulting in his new skill. But his vanity betrayed him. Darting and twisting recklessly, the feathers loosened, and he plummeted to the earth. From then on, spiders remained grounded, casting webs as silent bridges rather than attempting to conquer the skies. Sometimes, Anansi's schemes highlighted the folly of arrogance in others. He once tricked Elephant into a contest, tying the other end of the rope not to a rock, but to a resting whale. Both giants strained, exhausted by their own belief in competition, until they discovered the truth and were left humbled, laughter echoing through the forest. Yet not all contests ended in triumph. In one grim tale, Anansi tricked a lion into a pit lined with stakes. The lion, however, roared for aid, and its strength freed it from the trap. Anansi, humbled and chaste, learned that cleverness could entertain, but cruelty could provoke retaliation. Other tales showed him bested by the steady tortoise, whose patience overcame Anansi's frantic webs and shortcuts. Through these rivalries, Anansi's legend deepened. His victories brought joy and admiration, his failures offered laughter and lessons, and his occasional cruelty served as caution. Elephant's strength, Monkey's mischief, crocodiles' hunger, owls' wisdom, and tortoises' patience were all tested by the tiny spider. By firelight, children and elders alike learned the same truth. Size and might mattered less than wit, yet cleverness alone could falter without care. Anansi's webs were more than silk. They were metaphors for life itself, a reminder that intelligence must be balanced with patience, humility, and foresight. In these contests, Anansi bound the world with laughter, lessons, and the quiet thrill of triumph over pride. And as long as the firelight danced across eager faces, his webs reached further, capturing imagination, testing wits, and proving that even the smallest could leave an indelible mark on the grandest of stages. Anansi's stories were not bound to the villages of West Africa. As time passed and people were carried across oceans against their will, the spider's threads traveled with them. Hidden in memory, whispered from one generation to the next, these tales survived storms, slavery, and displacement. Where people went, Anansi followed, small enough to ride in the pocket of a thought, yet strong enough to endure chains and the tumult of history. In the Caribbean, Anansi became a familiar figure once more. The spider who had outwitted elephant and stolen stories from the sky god now moved among sugarcane fields and island forests. His voice transformed, shaped by new tongues, yet his cunning remained sharp. In Jamaica, he was known as Brer Anansi, or simply Nancy. His web glistened among banana groves and mango trees, and his tricks reflected the rhythms and challenges of island life. One tale told how Anansi captured all the stories of the island, sealing them in a wooden box. He carried it on his head, intending to climb the tallest tree and hide it forever. But, as in his earlier exploits, his young son watched below. Seeing his father struggle, the boy suggested tying the box to his back. Anansi tried it, found the climb easier, and was consumed with fury that his son had outwitted him. In anger, he threw the box to the ground, scattering the stories across the island. From then on, storytellers everywhere had a share of Anansi's tales, proving that even his hoarding could not contain the story's reach. Another tale placed him against a plantation owner proud of his wealth. Pretending to serve, Anansi observed the treasure carefully, waiting for the right moment. When night fell, he shrank into a tiny spider and slipped through the narrowest crack into the chest. By dawn, the chest was empty, and the owner bewildered. These stories were more than clever amusements. They were subtle triumphs, small victories over those who wielded power, and a reminder that wit could overturn oppression. In the Americas, Anansi's name shifted again. In Suriname, he became Anansi Tori, the teller of tales, outwitting jaguars, monkeys, and birds in forests new and strange. In Guyana and across South America, his cunning crept into villages and plantations, mocking pride and teaching that intelligence could survive in any environment. Even in the American South, the trickster endured, taking on new forms as Brer Rabbit. Though no longer always a spider, the spirit of Anansi lived on. Brer Rabbit was small, mischievous, and endlessly clever, using wit to escape foxes, wolves, and bears. His adventures echoed the old tales of Anansi. Traps became triumphs, weakness became strength, and cunning always found a way. One southern tale mirrors Anansi's cleverness. Brer Rabbit became ensnared by Tar Baby, set as a trap by Brer Fox. Yet, through guile and cunning, the rabbit feigned politeness, tricking the fox into throwing him into the briar patch, his safe haven. Though the story's form had changed, its essence, trickery, wit, survival, remained unmistakably Anansi. Across islands and continents, children grew up laughing at his tricks, shivering at his greed, and learning from his mistakes. Anansi's web stretched from West Africa to the Caribbean, to the Americas, binding generations together. Even those torn from their homes carried his stories in memory, whispers and song, until they became threads of cultural survival themselves. Anansi's journey across borders proved that no story could ever be imprisoned. He had once stolen tales from Nyame and scattered them across the world. Now, history itself carried them further. With every retelling, his sly laugh echoed, reminding all that the smallest, cleverest creature could never be silenced. No matter the form, Anansi, Tori, Brer Rabbit, the trickster endured. His cunning and humor crossed oceans and generations, weaving communities together with laughter, wisdom, and the quiet power of stories. Though Anansi was known for his tricks, laughter, and clever thefts, other tales lifted him higher, placing him among gods and spirits. In these myths, he was no mere forest mischief maker. He was a weaver of fate, a being whose silk touched the very fabric of the universe. His web became a bridge between realms, linking heaven and earth, the living and the dead, the seen and unseen. One of the grandest stories tells of how Anansi brought light to the world. In the earliest days, darkness cloaked the earth, and people stumbled blindly. The sun was held by the sky god, hidden from mortals. Anansi, ever restless and daring, decided that such treasure should not remain hoarded. Spinning his silken thread upward, he bargained with Nyame once again. To win the sun, he was tasked with capturing spirits of chaos, the great snake, the invisible fairy, and a swarm of deadly hornets. The snake was first. It stretched across rivers like a living bridge, seemingly too vast to bind. Anansi, however, feigned doubt, claiming the snake was not long enough to span a simple stick. Flattered, Snake stretched across the stick, and the clever spider seized the opportunity, binding him fast in gleaming silk. Next came the hornets, fierce and unyielding, their stingers glinting like tiny spears in the sun. Anansi carried a gourd of water, claiming a storm approached. The hornets, eager to avoid the deluge, flew inside the vessel, one after another, until it was full. Swiftly, Anansi sealed them in their own fear, trapping the swarm. The invisible fairy proved the trickiest. Anansi placed food atop a small gum figure, baiting the spirit. The fairy reached for the treat, its hand sticking fast. Struggling only tightened the trap, and by the time it realized the danger, Anansi had bound it securely with silken thread. With these 3 prizes, Anansi returned to Nyame's throne. Amazed and amused, the sky god granted him the sun, releasing its brilliance upon the world. Day and night began their eternal dance, and people for the first time lived in light and shadow. Once again, Anansi had reshaped creation with nothing but cunning and silk. Other cosmic myths deepened his connection to the world. Some claimed that the earth itself hung suspended in his web, held between sky and underworld. Earthquakes or storms were said to shake the strands, and people prayed that Anansi's web would not falter. Anansi also ventured into the realm of death. Among wandering spirits, he sought secrets for the living, the names of healing herbs, protective charms, and songs to guide souls. Yet even in this sacred space, trickery followed him. He once attempted to steal immortality, stuffing it into a bag and dragging it behind him. But the bag tore, scattering fragments of eternal life. Trees renewed each season, stars burning for ages, but humans remained mortal. Thus, Anansi explained the inevitability of death. His influence extended further. He tangled with spirits of rain, wind, and forest. In one story, he tried to bind the rain goddess to control her gifts. When he tugged too hard, floods nearly engulfed the land, and he released her. Another tale describes Anansi trapping the wind in a bag. For a brief time, the world grew still, trees did not sway, and fires suffocated. Only when people begged him did he release the gales, restoring life and movement. Through these myths, Anansi became more than a trickster. He was cosmic, a spider whose silk connected creation, a reminder that even the smallest could shape destinies. His victories gifted light, rain, and knowledge. His failures brought death, mortality, and chaos. Children listening by the fire learned that the ordinary and divine were bound together in him, and that wit could rival power, even as humility remained essential. Anansi's web, delicate yet unbreakable, fragile yet enduring, carried threads of story across worlds. The same spider dangling in a child's room had outwitted spirits, captured light, and taught mortals the power of cunning. He was a cosmic figure, a trickster and teacher, reminding all that every thread, whether in silk, story, or life, had weight, purpose, and meaning. For all his cleverness, Anansi was far from invincible. His victories filled the world with laughter, but his failures did as well. The storytellers never spared him from ridicule, for his greed, laziness, and pride often turned against him. In these tales, the great trickster became the fool, proving that no web could hold the full measure of fortune. One famous story recounts his gluttony. Ever unwilling to miss a meal, Anansi tied a thread from each of his 8 legs to the cooking pots of his neighbors, all preparing food simultaneously. His plan was simple. When each meal was ready, a tug on the thread would summon him, and he would arrive first at every feast. But when the meals were finished, every thread pulled at once. Anansi was stretched painfully in 8 directions, his legs growing long and thin. He screamed and flailed, but the threads held fast. Only by snapping free and tumbling into a river did he escape, famished, sore, and humbled. From that day, spiders bore his mark, spindly legs, reminders of a hunger never sated. Another tale shows his attempt to hoard wisdom. Nyame had entrusted him with a clay pot containing all knowledge. Anansi, greedy for the full treasure, bound it to his belly and climbed the tallest tree. The pot banged against his knees, slowing him. His son, observing quietly, suggested tying the pot to his back instead. The climb became effortless, but Anansi's pride erupted. If a child could offer better wisdom, the pot could not hold it all. In anger, he hurled it to the ground. It shattered, scattering fragments of knowledge across the earth. Ever after, wisdom was shared, but never complete. Anansi's greed ensuring no one could claim it entirely. His laziness also led to humiliation. Once, he tried to steal yams from a farmer's field, stuffing a bag in the night. Careless and greedy, he tore the bag, leaving a trail that led straight to his hiding spot. The farmer followed it by dawn, and Anansi, caught and humiliated, begged for mercy. Even magical tricks could fail. A poor woman owned a pot that filled itself with food. Anansi, always scheming, tricked her into lending it. He feasted until full, but boasting drew neighbors. The pot, weary of his greed, refused to produce further, leaving him empty-handed. Anansi's pride often led to spectacular spectacles. Once, he challenged Elephant, claiming his silk could drag the giant to the ground. Tying his thread to Elephant's leg and secretly fastening the other to whale in the sea, he laughed as the two titans strained. But the rope snapped, flinging Anansi high into the air. He tumbled head over legs into a thorn bush while Elephant and whale roared. His clever trick became a public humiliation. At times, he even dared challenge the sky god. Planning a grand feast, he invited all animals, boasting of the food he would provide. Yet, true to his careless nature, he had prepared nothing. The tables were empty. Guests laughed, leaving Anansi alone in his shame. The tale reminded listeners that pride without preparation leads only to ridicule. Even the smallest creatures could outwit him. Once, Anansi mocked Crab for its sideways walk. The insulted crab challenged him to a contest, pinching him with sharp claws until he skittered away in pain. The story reminded children that cleverness must be tempered with humility. Anansi's cruelty could rebound as well. He once trapped a lion in a pit lined with stakes, hoping to claim its strength. The lion roared, summoning aid from the forest. Other animals freed it, and Anansi was chased, pelted with stones, and forced to hide in a tree hollow, trembling. From that day on, he avoided open fields, preferring shadows where his webs could shield him. Perhaps his greatest humiliation came when he attempted to cheat death itself. He set a snare, baited with food, hoping to trap mortality. At dusk, death approached. The snare closed, but death laughed and slipped free. Anansi fled in terror, collapsing before the shadow, a vivid reminder that even the cleverest could not escape the fate they had unleashed. These stories of failure were told with laughter, delight, and lessons. Children clapped as Anansi flailed, tumbled, and emerged empty-handed. Adults nodded, understanding that cunning without care becomes folly, greed leaves emptiness, and pride ensures shame. Anansi's defeats balanced his triumphs, completing the portrait of a trickster who was both brilliant and foolish. When the fires burned low and children's heads rested upon their mothers' laps, storytellers left one truth lingering: Anansi would never disappear. His web stretched beyond time, beyond triumph and humiliation, beyond forest and sky. He was more than a spider, more than a thief of stories. He was the story itself. Anansi's myths explained the mysteries of life: why spiders have long legs, why death walks among men, why wisdom is scattered, why the moon shines, why patience can surpass cunning, and why greed leaves emptiness. He mirrored humanity, clever, greedy, foolish, triumphant, and humbling. His imperfections were the source of his immortality. He was eternal because he failed as often as he succeeded. Small yet unyielding, mischievous yet wise, foolish yet unforgettable, Anansi was the trickster who bound the world with laughter, caution, triumph, humiliation, and the threads of story itself. If you've traveled through the web of Anansi's tales with us tonight, let the stories linger in your mind and heart. Share these adventures. Pass them along to someone who loves myths, and let the laughter and lessons of the trickster spider continue to weave through your world. Subscribe for more tales from across the globe, and click the bell so you never miss a story waiting in the shadows, ready to spring to life. Step into the web and let the magic of storytelling never end.